introduce our panel tonight. My name is Dave Seeger. Welcome everybody to our first ever Compass Academy. We are a part of Preferred Behavioral Health Group. We're an agency that serves mostly Ocean and Monmouth County in the state of New Jersey. We have presence in all 21 counties throughout the state. We've been around since the late 1970s, providing behavioral health care across the lifespan, ages 4 through 100, in terms of individual, group counseling, family programs, partial care programs, substance abuse services, and any in-home or school-based counseling as well. Next slide, please. So this program in particular is brought to you by the NJ4S program, which is a new concept that was developed by the state of New Jersey, the Department of Children and Families, just this past summer. 2023 funding was released to several agencies throughout the state of New Jersey. Preferred Behavioral Health obtained the funding for both Ocean and Monmouth County to provide students and caregivers increased and more efficient access to safe spaces and support to build connections through prevention and mental health resources in order to meet their needs, contributing to a positive school climate and improved overall well-being. Next slide. So our program locally is known now as Compass, Creating Ocean Monmouth Prevention and Support for Schools. So this is part of our Compass Academy. This is a kickoff event for us, the first one we're doing of its kind, which will be hosted monthly by our group here that I'll introduce in a minute. And it's a center of learning for parents, caregivers, educators, and students on various topics related to youth mental health and prevention. So the way NJ4S Compass program is designed to operate is through a tier system approach. Most services to take place in the school setting. However, we are community-based agency that can provide programs such as this to the various spokes throughout our community in Ocean and Monmouth County, including virtually and in person. The core areas we're going to be addressing throughout the school year is going to be suicide prevention, bullying, violence prevention, substance use prevention, and teen pregnancy prevention. These are going to be done through a tiered system, including Tier 1 services, which is universal prevention programming. This is a way to address all youth grades K through 12 mostly through large group assemblies, class presentations, staff development, linkages to community resources. This is any youth in public school that has been identified by school personnel to require services. Tier 2 is a little more targeted intervention, and that's going to be a direct referral from the school for grades K through 6 through 12. And those services are going to be done in more of a smaller group setting, classroom setting, and we're going to be using evidence-based curriculums to address those core areas after students have been identified as having a more specific need related to one of those areas. And then, of course, our Tier 3 services is our more concentrated, focused mental health component. So schools can refer to NJ4S Compass for come out and do a brief clinical intervention with students right in the on the school campus. We can offer up to 60 days of free individual counseling for youth and their families. There's no cost for any of these services to school districts or to students or families. We do not accept insurance. This is a completely grant-funded program through the Department of Children and Families. So we're excited to be able to have a prevention and mental health outreach provided across all of Ocean and Monmouth County, and statewide. Really, Preferred is offering it Ocean and Monmouth. So that's our program, our NJ4S Compass services, which we'll give you more information about at the end if you need to get a hold of us. Tier 1 services could be just made through contact from a community agency or a school or a church group or anyone that may want us to come out and do a presentation or some type of staff development. Tier 2 and Tier 3 services are specific to schools, so they must make the referral. But if you are a parent or a caregiver that has a child that could benefit from our counseling services, we would encourage you to call your child's school and ask them to make a referral to us, and we can find them that way as well. So every year, the United States recognizes Red Ribbon Week during the month of October, specifically October 23rd through 31st. Red Ribbon Week highlights the importance of living a drug-free life. It presents an opportunity for parents, educators, and communities to reinforce the drug-free messages they share with their children throughout the year. During Red Ribbon Week, youth and adults around the nation pledge to increase their knowledge by learning more about the destructive effects of drug abuse, including prescription drug misuse, and renew their commitment to a healthy, drug-free lifestyle. This webinar will provide caregivers with valuable insights into critical aspects of substance use prevention, focusing on brain development and behavior, risk and protective factors, and the current state of substance use and non-use behaviors in adolescents, along with strategies for a shift into a supportive approach. The Partnership to End Addiction is a national nonprofit organization based in New York City. Partnership's mission is to transform how our nation addresses addiction by empowering families, advancing effective care, shaping public policy, and changing culture. Dr. Linda Richter is the Senior Vice President of Prevention Research and Analyst at Partnership to End Addiction, where she conducts research on the nature, scope, and predictors and consequences of all forms of substance use and addiction, especially among young people. Corey Hammond joins the team as the Director of Prevention Services. Partnership's prevention team leverages research to help raise awareness among parents, educators, health professionals, and policymakers about best practices in substance use prevention and addiction care. Our collaboration between Preferred Behavioral Health Group and Partnership to End Addiction is really excited to be offering this program tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Richter and Corey Hammond for this presentation on substance use, the core elements of substance use prevention.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dave. And thanks everyone for joining this evening. This is the first of many webinars to come. And so we're very excited to kick off our first one for Red Ribbon Week this year. This is our team that works on with Compass. So I'm the Director of Prevention Services. We have Dr. Linda Richter, and then we also have Olivia Root, who is our research assistant. Linda, do you want to say hi before we jump in?
Hello, everyone. Glad to have you on our webinar. Thank you.
All right. Here's what we're going to go over tonight. First, we're just going to start with an introduction to prevention. What does it mean? We'll go through risk and protective factors. We'll go through what are the key prevention targets and what are the types of things that we're concerned about. We'll go through adolescent brain development and how that's related to substance use prevention. We'll talk about moving away from a punitive approach towards a more health-based approach. We're going to talk about promoting healthy youth development. And then we're going to go through some of the resources that Partnership has. So you can leave here knowing where to look if you need more information. And then if we have time, hopefully we'll do a Q&A for any questions that you might have. And so what exactly is prevention? This may seem obvious, but prevention encompasses a lot more than what people might normally think of. And so we have, prevention can be having a conversation with kids about stress and anxiety. Prevention can be a school assembly where students listen to the story of someone who was addicted to substances and is now in recovery. It can be locking up your prescription medications so that kids can't reach them. And it can be policies that prohibit advertising around schools for addictive substances. But prevention is also so much more than that. So prevention can also be ensuring that new parents have affordable childcare and have affordable diapers and everything that they need. It's policies to help reduce poverty, paid family leave, treating childhood trauma, and guaranteeing health insurance coverage for addiction treatment for parents so that kids don't grow up in a home that's riddled with addiction and mental illness. It's teaching young children how to cope with their emotions and how to make good decisions. It's providing engaging after-school activities so kids have things that are fun to do after school and on the weekends. And it's ensuring that we have safe neighborhoods. But when most people think of substance use prevention, they're normally thinking about, health class about safe sex and staying away from drugs, or they're thinking about a PSA that they saw about how smoking is bad for you. It can be overwhelming to think about how to prevent substance use for young people, but we want to encourage you to take this very broad approach that anything you do as a parent to make your child feel loved and taken care of, that is substance use prevention. So that's one of our main takeaways that we want you to have this evening. And so when we talk about prevention, our whole philosophy at Partnership to End Addiction centers around this proactive, early upstream model of prevention. And so when we say upstream, that means not just treating mental health and behavioral symptoms as they emerge, but creating healthy environments necessary to prevent those risky behaviors and those bad outcomes in the first place. And so there's this famous Desmond Tutu quote that I always talk about that has a pretty good, very relevant here. And he said, there comes a point when we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And so by intervening earlier and more broadly, we can better prevent risk behavior in adolescence and its negative consequences. So part of what we're going to go over tonight is why teens and adolescents end up in the river of substance use, and how do we prevent them from falling in the first place.
Thanks, Corey. I'll take this part here. So there are a lot of risk factors, in other words, circumstances or characteristics that increase risk for substance use and other behavioral or mental health problems in young people that the research has uncovered over the years. And the research is really consistent about this. And they tend to fall within the domains of the child's broader environment, the child's community and school, the child's family, and then within their own individual personality or genetics or traits, just individual characteristics. But what's important to know, and this is just a sort of a sampling of what some of the well-studied risk factors are for a young person to develop a substance use problem. What's important to know is that even if a child does experience one or more of these, or even a lot of these, it doesn't mean that they're destined to develop a substance use disorder or addiction, or even to engage in substance use. Their risk is higher. But we do know that there is a cumulative effect. So the more risk factors a young person has in their life, and this is kind of logical, the higher the risk they have of engaging in substance use and potentially developing, a clinical substance use disorder, more colloquially known as addiction. Next slide, please. So one really important concept that's gotten a lot of attention in the research literature, and for good reason, is one form of a risk factor known as adverse childhood experiences. And this term is used sort of broadly, but it really pertains to a set of specific experiences that a child might have at a young age. And they're listed on the left over there. And we know from the research that about 35 million children have been affected by an adverse childhood experience that's listed here. And these are the ones that have been really strongly associated with substance use risk and the development of a substance use disorder. And as you can see on the right, this is the number in increasing order of how many of these adverse childhood experiences children ages, I think it's 0 to 17, have in their lives. Again, the main takeaway here is the more of these experiences a young person has, the higher their risk. Next, please. So when we talk about adverse childhood experiences, what's really important to understand is that it's typically considered an early incident of a stress or a trauma or an experience that is not just fleeting, it's prolonged, it's relentless. And if it's that case, then it could really produce what's known as a toxic stress response, which is an actual physiological response in the child that can affect how their, not only their physical health, but also their brain development. And as I said, the more of these, the higher the risk to the child. And what's really interesting, and the research is really solid on this, is that often, and sadly, these effects can be intergenerational. And we see that in our society where a family where one generation has experienced really severe early experiences in their life that are traumatic or stress-inducing, it, for various reasons, can be seen in future generations as well. And what we really want to do is break that cycle of adversity and unwellness. One way to think about the individual risk factors for substance use, which are those that kind of reside more in the individual child, we call it ABCD. I mean, there's many more than these, but these are sort of key ones to keep in mind. And we'll get into this a little bit more soon. The first is really the age of first use, how old a young person is when they first start using a substance. And by substance, we mean nicotine or tobacco, alcohol, and any kind of drug, whether it's an illegal drug, marijuana, sometimes illegal, or a prescription drug that is misused or not used as prescribed. So the earlier a young person begins to use any substance, this is solid research and it's really irrefutable at this point, the higher their risk of developing a substance use disorder. We know that disruptive life changes or big life changes increase a child's risk, again, because it kind of messes with their stability, security, sense of safety. And one of the really primary risk factors for a substance use problem are co-occurring mental health issues that are untreated. If somebody has one of these mental health issues or behavioral conditions and it's well treated, that's not as much of a risk, but if they're not treated, then it is. And obviously there's family history and genetic risk. So the good news is that there are a whole range of protective factors that can militate against these risk factors. So these are some that exist in the child's environment. We know about effective parenting, which we're going to talk some more about. Peers have a tremendous influence on kids. So if there are positive peer norms and influences, that's really protective. A young person who has strong attachment to their community, their school, their family, their friends, extracurricular activities, a strong affiliation with a trusted adult. It could be a family member or someone external to the family who serves as a mentor, and just sort of a safe living environment, all could really protect against substance use, even among those kids who are at risk. And then on the individual level, and we know this more now than ever when we're trying to kind of incorporate this into school and family life, is sort of fostering and bolstering young people's skills at social skills and coping skills and interpersonal skills and the ability to kind of regulate their emotions and express them in a healthy way, and cope well in the face of a challenge. And one that's really important that the research is really highlighting lately is this sense of a purpose or mattering or having some impact on the world for a child is super important in terms of fostering resilience and working against any risk factors that a young person might have. And what we know is that these skills really strengthen resilience. As the more they practice, the more they work because it elicits more positive reactions. It's kind of like a feedback loop in their social environment, and they can be learned and practiced and improved upon.
Great. So what are some of our targets when it comes to prevention? What are some of the things that we're worried about, and what's the current status of some of these risky behaviors? And so this table shows the prevalence of some substance use indicators. And on the far right, you'll see these green and yellow icons. And the green means that we're headed in the right direction. Yellow means there's not really significant change that's happening. And so this shows over 10 years how these substance use behaviors are changing. And so the percentage of high school students who self-report drinking alcohol or using marijuana in the past month. So those are both decreasing over the last 10 years, which is great. The percentage of students that self-report having ever misused prescription opioids or illicit drugs, and that includes cocaine, heroin, hallucinogens, ecstasy, inhalants, that's also going down. Great news. But where there isn't as much progress and where there's less data is when it comes to past month misuse of prescription opioids and having ever used an electronic vapor product, so vaping. And when it comes to vaping, they've only been asking about vaping on this nationwide survey since 2015. And you'll see that the prevalence of that peaked in 2019, but has then gone down, but not enough to where we're at a green shield yet. And so when we're thinking about kind of that downstream, the negative consequences that come from not just using substances, but abusing them. So a substance use disorder among teens, among youth aged 12 to 17, 8.5% met diagnostic criteria for an alcohol or substance use disorder. And of those teens, only 2.8% of those who needed treatment received it. So there's a lot of barriers for why adolescents are not receiving the treatment that they need. And 8.5 are having what we would call a substance use disorder, which is a lot. But importantly, what we want to stress is that more and more teens are choosing to not use at all, which is great news. And so there's other trends that have emerged over decades, like this graph goes back to 1976. So use of cigarettes, alcohol, and certain other substances has been declining over these decades. And the average age of first use has been increasing. So kids are waiting longer to try any substances, which is also very important. And so we're seeing here past month non-use and lifetime non-use are continually increasing as time goes on. So more and more teens are choosing not to try substances at all. In 2021, 70% of 8th graders and 35% of high school seniors were lifetime abstainers, so had never tried an addictive substance at all. And this is important because we want to normalize non-use. We can use data like these to counteract that prevailing idea that substance use in teens is inevitable or a rite of passage, because we know it's not. This shows that not using substances is a social norm among teens. And so then we can use that to our advantage.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, and to the children's advantage as well, because the peer influence is really important here. That's right. So you can go to the next slide. I want to just talk a little bit about understanding adolescent brain development and how it coincides with what we need to know about substance use risk for kids and also protection. So you hear a lot in sort of the general media and anecdotally about the teen brain, and everything is associated with that, but it's good to have a little bit more of an understanding, as many of you probably already do. But there are certain parts of the brain that are really tied to substance use risk and addiction. And what you see on the right are some of the key areas, although the entire brain is really part of it. So there's the basal ganglia and the amygdala, which are in the limbic system of the brain. And those are the parts of the brain that develop sooner in a young person's developmental trajectory. And those are the parts of the brain that are sort of, that drive our motivation to take in things that we need for survival. So whether it's food or drink, or these kind of basic survival skills, and those develop kind of early. And those are what motivates those are sort of the sense of pleasure or reward that we get when we engage in them. So when we eat, it feels good and we want to do it more. If we are thirsty and we drink, that feels right. It's reinforced. So we tend to repeat that behavior. What happens a little bit later in development, and not for a while actually, until a person is sort of, people say the age 25, it goes past that actually, like well into their 20s, sometimes even early 30s, is the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is in the front of the brain. And that's the part of the brain that develops later, and that really does sort of the executive functioning controls. It helps us think clearly, solve problems, have good judgment, decision-making. And the reason that adolescence and the teen years are really so important when it comes to substance use prevention is because, people think of it as that metaphor you probably heard, that teenagers are like all gas and no brakes, right? So the gas is like the limbic system, go, 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 get the pleasurable things, access the rewarding and reinforcing stimuli, without the brake that says, wait, hang on a second, maybe that's not the best thing to do in this situation. So the prefrontal cortex is not functioning at its optimal level or really very well at all, whereas that kind of driving force to go for the reward is operating at full force during the teen years, as is the emotional kind of elements of a young person. So I don't like when people say that kids have no prefrontal cortex ability or no impulse control. They do. We all know teenagers who are perfectly responsible and well-functioning and are not doing all kinds of crazy things all the time. It's just a relative idea where what's driving them more at that point, and there's a physiological reason for it, is this drive for sort of reward and stimulation, which leads to risk-taking. And for that reason is why we do tend to focus primarily on adolescents when it comes to prevention. And it's important that we do, because it is a period of intense and transformative brain development, and it's very sensitive at this age. How your brain ends up developing is really subject to the stimuli that it is exposed to. So the good side of it is not that, teenagers are these crazy aliens and we don't understand why they behave this way. They're developing this way so that they do want to take risks and encounter new experiences and basically set themselves up in a good way to take on the challenges of adulthood. If kids are unable to take risks and, go with their impulses a little and put themselves out there, then they would never learn to be able to handle things. So it's really adaptive and developmentally appropriate. The problem is that this risk-taking developing brain is not yet equipped with all the cognitive controls that they would need in the face of all the sort of negative influences we have in our society. So that's why it is the stage that's most vulnerable, not only to using substances, but also to experiencing the adverse effects of substance use. And also the age where, due to substance use, there are persistent and chronic changes to the brain itself in terms of its structure and functioning, and that can really underlie future addiction. So we have some slides here, which you can look at in more detail later. I don't want to go into too much depth on these, but each substance affects the brain differently, but you'll see a pattern that kind of goes across all of them, which I just kind of want to highlight here. So when it comes to nicotine, for example, it activates these receptors in the brain that is used to receiving a naturally occurring chemical or neurotransmitter that performs a certain function. So the substance is sort of mimicking the function of something that occurs naturally. In this case, nicotine is mimicking the function pretty much of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which facilitates attention and learning and cognitive abilities, right? So that's why people feel like they're, have heightened attention and that they're sort of stimulated when they use nicotine. But over time, the brain becomes desensitized to too much of the nicotine. It's not the natural state of the brain, and doesn't match the level of what the natural neurotransmitter does. So the brain is always trying to reach a balance. So when it's feeling like it's too much being pushed on that side, it moves to the other side essentially, and it either removes some of those receptors or just becomes less receptive to, and less responsive, I should say, to the nicotine over time, which is why we experience withdrawal symptoms and cravings when we don't continue to ingest the nicotine. So over time, what happens is, even though initially you get this positive experience from using it, over time your brain's like, oh, that's too much, and it becomes less responsive to it, and you actually have the opposite effect of less of an ability to pay attention, less, you kind of get the boomerang effect from the substance itself. You can go to the next slide, Corey. And although every substance functions slightly differently, I don't want to overgeneralize. This kind of balance between the substance produces this sort of feeling or ability or sensation that's positive and rewarding, and in many cases helps you function in a good way that you like. Over time, your brain essentially adapts and says, that's too much. That's not the natural state, moves in the opposite direction, and then you're unable to experience that positive effect again, unless you continue to use more and more and more. And ultimately, no matter how much you use, you're never going to achieve that, because the brain keeps trying to get you back to that stable level. So we also know that for teens, especially when it comes to alcohol, there are all sorts of long-lasting effects on the brain that affect memory, the ability to experience fear or danger, which is really dangerous, obviously, because if you're not attuned to that, then you put yourself at higher risk. And many of the cues that affect an adult when they're drinking too much, that tell them, hey, slow down, this is dangerous, those aren't as prominent for young people, which is why they're at higher risk as well. We know that a lot of kids have blackouts and memory impairment when they drink too much. And a lot of these changes to the brain that come from alcohol are long lasting. We're going to get into all these substances in future webinars, so I'm just kind of trying to give you a quick overview here, but cannabis or marijuana has significant effects on the teen brain as well, especially through its main psychoactive ingredient, which is THC. That's the ingredient that gets you high. It interferes with the parts of the brain that control executive functioning. So again, prefrontal cortex, as well as memory, motivation. But we do know that the high doses and potency of current products can really cause more severe mental health symptoms, as well as physical impairment in the long term. Acutely, it can cause hallucinations and delusions and other symptoms of psychosis. However, chronic and heavy use over time is associated with those bullets you see on the bottom, and people are seeing more and more in the emergency rooms and in the clinical and the academic research literature, really significant effects that are mostly tied to the nature of the marijuana that kids are using today, which is, again, very, very high in THC levels, very potent, very concentrated, and they do produce significant effects. And yes, marijuana/cannabis can produce addiction. People do get marijuana use disorders. It is an addictive substance. The main neurotransmitter that's talked about when we think of addiction is dopamine. It's a really adaptive and important neurotransmitter or chemical that we have in our brain that basically drives behaviors that keep us alive, as I said earlier. It is associated with reward or pleasure, but really what it does is get you to repeat a behavior that is important for life and sustaining life. It helps to form habits, both good habits and not so healthy habits. And it makes you essentially want to repeat the behavior that you just engaged in that produced this big surge of dopamine. The problem is, as I said before, when there's too much dopamine surging in your brain responds by becoming less sensitive to it. And over time, you need more and more of that substance to experience that good effect, which is basically the definition of tolerance to a substance. And over time, the substance, the drug that once produced that good, rewarding feeling, it's not really doing that anymore. You just kind of need it so that you feel somewhat stable and not get sick. So it's interesting to think about how brain development works in kids and how dopamine works so that we really can understand, like when we see a young person engaging in substance use as a parent or a teacher or some other adult, and we kind of get angry at them and say, why don't you stop? Or what are you doing? And don't you know this is harming you? There are physiological processes that are underlying the behavior, and it's really hard to control. We know it's hard for adults. It's even harder for young people. So when something is reinforced either internally by your body or your brain or externally from your peers or your parents or social media or whoever, it's reinforced, which means it's going to be repeated. And if there's a behavior that's not reinforced, that's looked down upon, or that doesn't produce a good rewarding effect, then the person will stop doing that behavior. But the point of this is to just recognize, like, it's not all so much under the young person's control. There's a lot that goes into it. And again, I know we like to show these slides all the time because this is really, if you take away anything today, it's to try and get young people to delay their initiation or their first use of the substance, whether it's nicotine, alcohol, marijuana, or any drug, because as you can see from these graphs, the earlier a young person uses, look to the left of each of these graphs, the higher the risk that their use will turn into a substance use disorder or addiction. It's just a very powerful finding. It's across all studies. It's really not disputed at this point. The longer a person waits to begin using a substance, preferably they don't use it all, but let's say they do, the longer into adulthood they wait, the lower their risk of developing addiction to that substance.
Great, thanks, Linda.
Yeah.
And so if we understand some of that adolescent brain development, so if we know a little bit more about why our kids' brains are working the way that they're working, and we have some grace and understanding when it comes to why they do the things that they do, then we can move away from this punitive, punishing approach when it comes to substance use and towards one that might be a little bit more understanding and then therefore a little bit more effective. And so going back to the reinforcement of behaviors, we know that behaviors make sense. You may ask a teen why they made a certain decision, and they could say, I don't know, But no behavior happens without a thought. Like all actions have a thought behind them. And so there's many reasons why a kid might try marijuana. And so whether or not that behavior gets reinforced is whether or not there's positive association with that behavior or a negative association with that behavior. And so as we see here, you know, trying marijuana to feel calmer, or a kid might feel like they might fit in more in socially by trying marijuana. That's like the positive association that could happen with it. But then on the flip side, if marijuana makes you feel anxious, paranoid, and it's going to cause your peers to look down on you, that behavior is not reinforced. So again, a behavior that's positively reinforced will continue. A behavior that is negatively reinforced will not. And this is not just for substance use. This is for anything. And so how we've looked at substance use in the past and our messaging around it has varied widely. And so approaches to youth substance use, they used to be dominated by scare tactics and this punitive approach that we're talking about. The idea, you know, if you work on your refusal skills, then when the scary stranger comes up to you in the alley and offers you a joint, then you can say no. And if you try substances, then that's a moral failing on your part and you just didn't learn how to say no. And then when a kid gets caught with something at school, some of the only options previously would be suspension or expulsion, which we know for most kids, suspending them will only make them miss class, get more behind in classwork, separate them from teachers and positive adult figures, and make success from that point more difficult. And then, you know, programs like DARE, like I was a DARE kid. They brought in law enforcement officers to schools and tried to focus on the sometimes hyperbolic negative effects of substances and teach you how to say no. But research shows that it was not very effective. Research shows that arming adolescents with facts about substances that are true, arming them with knowledge about their own brain development and what it means, arming them with critical thinking skills, social and emotional skills, that's a much more effective route to keep kids off of substances. And so this is changing. Current messaging around substance use does not look like what it used to. These are some self-promotion here. These are plugs from our Starts with Connection PSA campaign, which was aired in 2020. And so it highlights how the approach to substance use now has changed. We know that trying to scare people into abstaining from drugs doesn't work. And we know that severely punishing them if they do try drugs doesn't, you know, stop that process from continuing. And so promoting connection, honest, loving relationships between family members, close friends, and trusted adults, that is what really works. It's on YouTube if you didn't see it when it was airing live. Highly recommend. It's really moving and very adorable. And so moving from this punitive approach to a health-based approach. It's this idea of focus on promoting children's health and safety, not punishing undesired or unhealthy behaviors. We recognize that undesirable or unhealthy decisions, they happen for rational, developmentally appropriate reasons. And when we understand the motivation behind those behaviors, we can help children satisfy those needs with healthier and safer alternatives. And so this approach, it looks much different than what we did even just in the early 2000s, but it's evidence-based. And so talking about moving away from a punitive approach, kind of the low-hanging fruit and an easy way to do that is to try to avoid using stigmatizing language when we're talking about substance use. And, you know, person-first language is kind of a buzzword right now. And a lot of people are talking about it, and it can seem like kind of a nebulous concept, but it does have real-world implications. Like there's been research studies that have been done to show that instead of calling someone a substance abuser and using words like someone with a substance use disorder can make a real world difference in the type of treatment that they get when they come into a treatment center. And so person first language is this idea of a disability, an impairment, or a struggle is not the entirety of someone's identity. It's just a small part of what they're going through at this moment. So we encourage you to use words like a person with a substance use disorder, a person who misuses alcohol, as opposed to some of these words with negative connotations that can be degrading and stigmatizing. And a lot of us have already made the transition to using person-first language in other cases and may not have realized it. So you may have found yourself using, saying that an individual has a mental or physical disability instead of some of the more unsavory words that were popular a couple decades ago. And so when we're thinking about why this matters for parents, if a child is struggling with something, they may not feel comfortable or safe going to an adult that's using stigmatizing or degrading language. And so in a similar vein, we refrain from broadly referring to kids as good kids or bad kids. You've certainly heard someone say, my kid would never try drugs, they're a good kid. But we know that all kids are going to make bad decisions sometimes, and that doesn't make them bad kids. And even if a teen tries a substance, that doesn't mean that they're broadly deserve the label of being a bad kid. And so using person-first language like this, this is an integral way in which we can move away from that punitive approach towards one that is more focused on health and safety. And we can kind of break down some of those barriers that are making it difficult for people to seek the help and care that they need.
Thank you, Corey. Right. So I know we've been talking a lot about like teenagers who maybe are already using and how to handle it and all that, but it's really important to kind of take a step back, and we're going to go into this more in future webinars. So I'm just going to go through it a little quickly here, but what are some things that we can do before the child hits the teenage years or before they're already at risk? How do we move more upstream, as Corey mentioned earlier, and really promote healthy youth development, which we know is such an important protective factor for when it comes to substance use? So, we know that there are things that parents can do that can help teens choose healthier behaviors. And as we said before, it really starts with like understanding what motivates them. So if a young person really is struggling with certain issues, then it's really important to understand what those are and help them with it so that it doesn't become more of a problem and lead them to try and self-medicate or treat their own issues with through unhealthy means. These are common parenting things that you all are very familiar about, but, you want to validate their motivations without validating the negative behavior. So if a kid is drinking too much because they have tremendous anxiety, you don't want to make that okay, but you do want to acknowledge that there's a reason behind their behavior and be there to help them find a more safer way to handle it. And we can really do a lot to reinforce sort of their positive and healthy behaviors that fulfill those motivations. So it's the carrot and the stick idea. And that could be through offering verbal or physical rewards for healthy choices. And that actually has physiological effects on the young person's brain. The more you reinforce the positive connections, it's not just like theoretically, it's actually a physical connection as well in the brain that makes them want to repeat those behaviors more and more. So some key quick things is you want to pay more attention to the desired behavior than to just always catching them on their negative ones and pointing out the negative things that they do, which I know as a parent is very hard to resist. And it's important to reinforce them after they engage in the behavior, not before. So if they do something, you acknowledge it and not necessarily reward them with something physical, but just sort of praise and acknowledgement and give some attention to the good stuff instead of only the bad things, and be really specific about what kind of things you're proud of that they did. Don't just say, hey, you were great today, but like name some specific things. That's really important for kids. And we know this already, but it's important to focus on their efforts more so than the outcomes of their behavior. So we know this with academics. You want to talk more about, wow, I'm so proud of how hard you studied for that test and, how seriously you took that class, as opposed to, I'm so proud of you that you got that A. Okay. Right. So there's a whole field of social emotional learning. It's a little controversial now, unfortunately, but the basic premise of it is, hey, it might be smart to teach young kids, not just math and reading and those sorts of things, which are certainly important to do in schools and at home, but also to have them understand their feelings and their emotions and know how to kind of regulate them and express them in healthy, adaptive ways, and know how to engage with other people on an interpersonal level, know what to do when they're feeling stressed or challenged or anxious, so that they don't resort to behaviors or feelings that are really negative and damaging. So that all falls within this sort of category that's called social emotional learning, which is a part of a lot of schools right now, and a lot that parents can do as well in their own home to sort of foster these really, really critical skills of young people being able to manage themselves, be aware of why they're feeling the way they are, and make good decisions and engage in good relationship skills and have some social awareness. Those are critical life skills that will really benefit children. And there's just a whole range of activities and things that parents could do and schools can do to foster that in young people. And ultimately, what we're really trying to achieve, I know there's a lot of buzzwords out there, there's grit, there's all these things, but resilience is really critical when it comes to substance use prevention and other preventing other adverse outcomes, because it's really this like critical ability for a person to withstand, overcome, and rebound from a challenge or a stressful situation or experience. And the way we conceive of it is every adult who's in a child's life really has this responsibility to help provide a consistent and stable and nurturing environment for young people that promotes this kind of resilience and mental health and physical health, and helps those kids develop this shield against the adversities that are going to come their way, and help them come out from it stronger and better able to cope. So we have this really nice infographic that has like 10 key protective parenting strategies. This applies to any adult really in a young person's life, but just to kind of give you a sense of some of these. And again, you can look at these in more detail later, but the earlier we start doing these things and building these skills in kids, the better. The more that we as adults are a credible source of information to young people about substance use, about mental health issues, the more we come to them with facts that they could trust and believe, the better off they're going to be, and the less they're going to go to unreliable and uncredible sources. As Corey said earlier, it's really important to take a health rather than a punitive approach to these issues, and to engage in positive reinforcement. At the same time, as the adults, we want to monitor our kids' behaviors and whereabouts, and be able to guide them and know what they're up to, and sort of intervene if they're engaging in something risky. And we do that through open communication and telling them what we expect of them, and encouraging alternative, healthier behaviors if they're engaging in unhealthy behaviors. And really importantly, if we do see something that's concerning, that we don't just hope it goes away and that it's going to pass, but we actually address it as soon as possible. And that one up in the corner on the right, which is modeling, I could talk for hours about that, but as adults, the more we model these things for young people, it's so much more important than what we just sort of lecture them about. So if we show that we don't need, when we drink or use a drug or something, it's not like, oh my God, I need this to reduce stress, right? It's such a hard day. Then you're not putting those ideas in your child's head that those two things are linked, that a substance can alleviate stress or anxiety. The more we are able to express our emotions in a healthy way and engage in good interpersonal skills, the kids are watching us. They're not listening to us, but they're watching us. So it's really important to model that kind of behavior. We also just kind of want to put some of these basic things out here. And again, we'll go over these more in detail later, but some common signs of teen substance use, essentially to, sum this up in one sentence, is any significant change from what's, their baseline, right? So all kids are irritable and aggressive, all those things. But if there's like a change all of a sudden that's not easily explained, you kind of want to pay attention to that, whether it's in their behavior, their friendships, their appearance, their academic performance, how they interact with you, how they just behave in general. Those are important signs to consider. And a lot of these are things that I've already addressed, but it's sort of like a checklist. I want to leave enough time for Dave to continue, so you can move on.
Okay. And so just quickly, I'll go through things that you can find on our website, just some resources if you're looking for some more information. So when you go to drugfree.org, and if you click on Get Support, these are the types of things that you'll be offered. We have personalized text messaging programs. We have online support groups that are led by parent coaching, so peer coaching. We have helpline support that's real-time call, text, email, and you'll speak to somebody that can help. And that's, you can share your concerns and get an action plan. We also have self-paced trainings that you can take. We have a substance use risk assessment tool, which is now available in Spanish too. Very exciting. And this is not a diagnostic tool. This is more of a just how worried should I be? So it'll ask you 5 or 6 minutes worth of questions, and then you'll come out with kind of a better idea of that. We have guides for parents and families, how to raise resilient kids, and more in-depth on substances and mental health, and substance-specific guides, so you can learn more about whatever you'd like there. We have playbooks for parents, protecting your teenagers' well-being and handling challenges for teens and younger adults. And then we have LGBTQ plus resources. We have a personalized text messaging program for parents of individuals who are LGBTQ plus, so you can get kind of more personalized messaging based on your situation. And we have just a few minutes if there's some questions. I guess I can pull up the Q&A. There's no questions yet, and I wanted to make sure that we had time to pull up some of the final slides from Dave about NJ4S and what's coming up next. But if anyone has any questions for us, you can put them in the Q&A and I can get to them, or you can put them in the chat. I'll have that open as well. But in the meantime, since we don't have a lot of time right now, definitely, if you have questions as you're ruminating on this later tonight, please reach out to Linda and myself. We're very responsive. You can email us about anything. Someone just asked if we'll get a copy of the slides. Yes, absolutely. So once this is over, we will send out the recording as well as the slides. And this, we would love if you could take, it's just 13 questions. It'll take you 2 or 3 minutes, a feedback survey about this event. And the link to this will also be sent out afterwards with the slides.
Wonderful. Thank you, Corey and Dr. Linda. That was chock full of information. I really appreciate it. I'm sure people will, leave with a lot of questions, and we do encourage you to reach back out to us. We'll put some contact info at the last slide, and we really hope to have you back every month. We're big believers in providing this ongoing level of support for parents in the community and educators, not just throw information at you once in a while and hope that you use it, but have this as a normal part of your hopefully monthly discussion this year, and hopefully build some those skills and resources that are practical and useful for you on a regular basis. So we will be seeing more of our partnership monthly. Please look out for our flyers on our social media platforms, which you can find here. We try to advertise them through the school's websites as well, but you can also find us on our website, referbehavioral.org/NJ4S Compass, where you can find a whole host of other resources locally regarding mental health, as well as the partnership to end addiction. So one last piece of information that I wanted to share. Do we have the Tau Connect flyer on there?
Oh, yes. It was.
So this is a great resource that we're offering out of our Compass program this year for all students ages 13, teachers, school staff, and caregivers in Ocean-Monmouth County. This is completely free. You can go to our website and create your own registration link. You can download the app on your phone, And this is a self-paced online wellness tool that you can use at any time you want to gather resources, take courses on stress management or on mindfulness skills. So we really believe that wellness starts within. It's not just about promoting and teaching it, but if we are taking care of ourselves, we can take care of the people that we care about most. So we really encourage all of you to take advantage of TAO this year. It's a wonderful opportunity to learn some new skills, teach your kids some skills, do it with them. They have that 20 minutes of downtime and they're bored and you don't want them playing on YouTube or TikTok. Send them to TAO Connect and ask them to complete a module on deep breathing. So that's definitely something I'd like to get feedback on from the community. If you're using it and you're having positive feedback, please send our way. If you're having any issues with the site, there's info on our website on how to get a hold of us. Without further ado, we will end our presentation for the evening, get you back to your lives. But thank you for joining us. I hope to connect with you again real soon. And keep a lookout for the email from us regarding the link to this recording. And have a great evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.